All right, so welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast live, coming from MEP Force. Thank you to our our crowd here at the conference. So this is a whole new experience for us to be recording a live podcast while streaming in Nathan Wood remotely. So thanks for joining us remotely, and Travis Voss, thanks for joining us here in person.
Yeah. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're here at MEP Force. The theme is stronger together. I want to take some time to really unpack what does that mean for the real world, and how do you change the industry? So not just talk about it, not just be the the talking heads that come in and bloviate, but how do you actually create the change in the real world?
I think that that's why Nathan is here, right? And you have talked about he's talked a lot about not just being academic about things, about having the talking heads. He with the CPC and foundation, everything like that. He's releasing white papers. He's trying to encourage and influence people to really push that change through all parts of the industry.
Yeah, and I think, for this audience, certainly in the conversations we've been having, Travis, in the larger MEP committee conversations and other things is, there's really two stages to this change management of, do we have our internal in-house, within a Helm Mechanical or within any of these organizations out there, do you have the right leadership and the right kind of systems in place internally? And then, once you do, there's still this whole other battle because we are in construction. We work on projects with other trade contractors, other GCs, designers, engineers. And so there's this sort of external battle that is that next change management. And so kind of just realizing, like, are we dealing with within our walls internal, or do we feel like we've got a good culture there and ready to start some of those battles with prefab and other opportunities that now involve external parties?
One of the things that stood out in Randy's keynote this morning was around the change management and the maturity level, but then creating the culture of keeping the change and the excitement and getting that grassroots in there. How have you guys been doing that at home to keep that innovation? You guys have such a great, just natural, innovative spirit there. How do you keep that going?
Well, I mean, you're right about the innovative spirit, and it does start with Brian Helm, our president, that has that mindset. That, I mean, it's not just he's got a growth mindset. He wants to keep growing the Helm Group, but growth for the sake of growth isn't always the right thing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can boost your revenue up, but if your profits go down, what's the point? Yeah. So there is that mindset there, and it does come from the top down of let's focus on change where change makes sense. Not everything, we are a successful company, so not everything has to change, but it is sending that mindset of trying to do something different and making it part of the culture.
Mm-hmm. Nathan, on CPC, getting back to kind of the practical side of making the change in reality, you guys do the workshops. Can you take a second and kind of unpack what the workshops is and what's the goal behind that?
Yeah, I think, Travis and I were having this conversation that especially, with Brian and his vision, Travis has had a pretty long leash to test out a lot of different cool tech and HoloLens and all these things kind of over the years. And I think what the sentiment that all of us tinkerers have come back to is that there's just some foundational kind of blocking and tackling. Do we have the right leadership? Do we have the right culture? Do we have the right measurements of what performance is at the individual level, at the project level, at the organizational level? And really kind of reassessing and as Adam Grant would say, rethinking a lot of these kind of established truths and these sacred cows that I think are part of the reason we're stuck in our rut now, because the technology is certainly no longer the barrier to success. It's really where we get in our own way from either a culture or outdated practices that need to be updated and kept up to date.
How do you start getting the data connected in? That's one of the things that I loved about the workshops that you guys did. Really thinking back to the summit.
Well, and it's such a broad conversation, right? Because to your question about the summit and what we've been trying to do with this common data exchange language is understand that those of us that are big tinkerers and technologists within the industry still don't really speak data and don't come from the world that Travis comes from, and and vice versa, right? That we need to learn from each other. And so having a visual language, because we are all in construction visual thinkers, that helps us understand, okay, here's my data as a trade contractor in my system of record, and there's going to be other systems of record, Procore and ACC and Nuforma and otherwise, that are going to be out in that world. And how do I, work within my system, but still allow that through all this capability of APIs to share that with other people? If we don't develop those blocking and tackling rules of how are we going to redo an RFI, how are we going to redo a submittal or a change order, any of these kind of painful documentation parts of these jobs that we love to do, the more that we can speed up that documentation and standardize it, we can get better industry analytics and start to do all the cool things that other industries are doing. But again, not until we have that foundation set in place.
So, we're kind of in a innovative bubble here, I think, in large parts. How do you break out of that bubble to start hitting the critical mass of people understanding the language, Nathan, that you were just talking about, and connecting those dots, even if they're using different terms for that? Does that question make sense?
So well, yeah. Where's my coin to put in because the term that Travis loves, you got to go slow to go fast, right? Or lower the water to see where the rocks are. And I think that's a lot of where we're at is by going slower, by mapping out these workflows and seeing where things aren't working, we can really expose where those opportunities are. And too often we're just looking for that quick fix and don't build in the time to actually understand and speak that same language. So that we've got a lot of work to do to build that common language. I think the workshops that we're doing and all this great stuff with CDX is just the start of it.
And I think that what I'm seeing happen is, the maturity matrix, like I would say the Helm group is probably a 3.5, 4, somewhere in there. But then the industry, where's the industry lie? Maybe a 1 or a 2. But I think that we are starting to see people understand that, we have to take those hard looks at ourselves. We have to peel back the layers and see what's ugly, because to Nathan's earlier point, like we threw a bunch of tech on it and stuff didn't get better. Well, that's because our processes aren't quite right. So I think that's what we're starting to see. Organizations like the MCA, like CPC, SMACNA, NECA, are really taking this theme of, I almost said better together again, but stronger together.
Stronger together. The backdrop doesn't help you.
It doesn't help me at all. Yeah. But stronger together, because a Nathan Woodism again is, we have to disrupt ourselves before we are disrupted. Katera failed, but that doesn't mean the next one will. Mm-hmm. So we have to be prepared for that. And we will be more successful if we work together, which is hard for us as an industry because we're generally combative.
Right. Well, it's changing your mindset around it too, because to your point, you can't just throw tech at a problem and expect it to fix it.
Right.
You have to change, you go further upstream, change the way you're thinking about the workflow of it. Because just adding tech to it is realistically, it's going to make the problem way worse.
Right.
Because you're just adding so much more complexities.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that can happen inside your organization as well, right? Like the issues between an IT department and a VDC department, or kind of different rifts even within technologists. Like that is the reality of these foundational misunderstandings and paradigm shifts that need to happen. So yeah, those conflicts can happen inside your organization, or they can happen, due to all the external factors that we're all well aware of.
It's because my view, I don't think people slow down enough to actually take the time, plan it on the front side, think through it all. That seems like a waste of time in the industry, where really that's such a huge time saver in the long run. If you take that time, map it out, get with the people that you need to be talking with on the front side and go, this is our goal. This is where we're going to. This is how we're going to get there. Map the plan out. That doesn't mean that you are stuck and you're rigid to it, but it gives you the flexibility, I think, to adapt and change on the fly.
Yeah, I agree. As for an industry that's all about schedule and planning, we don't do a lot of planning. And we don't do, and I think this is a Nathan thing again, we don't spend enough time working in the business or working on the business, instead of just working the business. We really don't think about that. And some of it, from a specialty contractor standpoint, I don't want to say it's not our fault, but it really isn't entirely our fault, because the way that the industry has been up to now is like, by the time we get the project, we're three months behind. Mm-hmm. There's no planning that can happen at that stage. You're just off and going. That's starting to shift too, with some of the different contracting methods that are coming up, and some of the right players starting to push back a little bit. Like, you can't just, sorry, CMGC, you can't just give us a project and tell us we already missed the schedule. So some of that's starting to adjust, and hopefully that will allow us to pull back and really think about the way we do things.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite quote on that one is Mike Tyson's. You have to give him credit. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? And I think that's the reality that we're in, is that it is tough to plan ahead when things change in the last minute. And so, like, the predictability and the ability to forecast, I don't think we'll ever be good at in construction. So I think really even just thinking about the strategy of when you should plan and how much detail you should plan and how much flexibility you should plan for is as much the battle as it is, yes, plan earlier, but maybe plan less even earlier and plan more just in time, because we can predict that. And so I think that's part of that whole paradigm shift is, what does it really mean to plan versus schedule versus measure that implementation and learn from it.
Yeah, I mean, that ties directly into what Randy was talking about with the Scrum approach and doing the short sprints and thinking about it differently instead of a whole project. Take it in segments.
Take it. It's easier to take it in bite-sized chunks.
Right. It's less overwhelming.
Right.
So what's the first domino then that needs to fall for all these stuff to, going back to the practical side of things and how do we actually take action on it? What needs to fall first for everything else to kind of click in place?
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
I have an answer.
I thought you might, Nathan.
Everyone is an expert at something. Nobody's an expert at everything.
Right.
I think like just having that mindset entering the room, because there's so much ego in our industry, right? And there's a lot of this, lead and follow mentality. But I think part of bringing together a large group and bringing together different perspectives and being more inclusive is recognizing that everybody brings a perspective, everybody brings an expertise, and that they should be vocal to it, but also be ready to receive, feedback from different perspectives and take that in stride and learn from it. That's easier said than done,
right.
In our industry for sure.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's a fight that everybody has. Nobody wants to have stuff imposed on them, but we need to start building standards, both internally and as an industry, because standards help us define the guardrails. They help us define that process and the plan. Mm-hmm. You can also plan what happens if you can't stay on plan. The hard part to your point, Nathan, is everybody has an ego. Everybody wants standards as long as you standardize on what I do. So it is getting those people in the room and say, okay, what makes sense for the largest group of us?
Mm-hmm. So what's the balance then between being vulnerable about your ability, your skill set, where you fit in, and showing that kind of authentic self versus just being a professional and getting the job done?
Oh man! Well, if anyone's ever read The Challenger Sale, is a great book, marketing book about kind of the whole change in mindset from the kind of '90s relationship builder mentality and how that led to so many failures in so many other industries, despite our continued belief that it is the best way to do it. That really being forward with what you're able to do, what you're not able to do, is how a lot of the companies are winning more work now, and especially if you're working with tech firms and more progressive firms, they almost expect that mentality. So I think sometimes our expectations of what the customer is looking for may not always be what they are, but it's true sometimes they are looking for that relationship builder, and maybe that's just not who you should build for.
What does it look like if it's not in opposition? Like in real terms, I set up that dichotomy of being vulnerable versus getting the job done and doing what you need to do. But if those are going hand in hand, what does that really look like? How do people know that that's actually happening?
Well, I think if it's actually happening, you're going to see those positive results in the movement. I think that one of the things we were talking about last week when we were having the pre-call for this was talking about empathy, learning the empathy. I think that in construction, we talk about a lot not being able to fail. And I think that if we set up that environment where we're allowed to have failures, to admit our shortcomings, I think that's where you're going to start seeing that needle move more in that.
Yeah, I learned a term recently from Brent Darnell about affinity bias. this kind of natural tendency to be around people who think like
Right.
us and act like us and look like us. And it's a natural tendency. We all do it. But I think true innovation comes when you let down your guard and you let in different perspectives that aren't typically in that included group, and that so much of us, all three of us included, do happen to fall into that majority included group, and can be very difficult for us to empathize with those that are not in those included groups. But I think we all have instances where we felt ostracized or felt, or thought differently than the rest of the group, and having that that confidence and that to be vulnerable is a huge, I think, first step. That the more you see folks out there doing it, the bigger they are, the more powerful they are, and the stronger they are for it. And so it's encouraging that as we see others in the industry be forward and be vulnerable, that it is contagious and it's working.
I don't mean this in a callous question. Why should people care about it? Like, does it actually do something to the bottom line, showing the empathy, showing the compassion, telling the story, and opening up and being vulnerable? What does it do to the bottom line in the long term?
I think it depends on who your customer is. Back to that challenger sale strategy. It's not going to work for every single customer, because some customers are looking for the relationship builder. But again, if you look at the success rate of those projects that went into it with rose-colored glasses and did the relationship builder and ultimately did not succeed, I think the bottom line will show that in the long run, not taking those projects was the right way to go. And Travis, you may have examples or others. I can't think of any offhand, but that tends to be kind of the storyline, is that those that say no actually end up getting more work because they're getting the right kind of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And when to your question about impacting the bottom line, I would think, and you would have to give it time to play out, but I think we all have experience in construction of people, not having empathy or being afraid to admit that they're not going to be able to accomplish a task or whatever. So what do? They just keep kicking the can. They keep burying it, and the project goes south. Mm-hmm. Like, what happens if we fostered an environment where that stuff came out at the beginning? The project should just go better, right? I would think.
Right. Yeah. So Travis, you mentioned earlier about the competitiveness in the industry, which is awesome.
Right.
I'm a hyper competitive guy. I appreciate that. But how, thinking on the Stronger Together theme, how do you maintain the competitiveness but come together as MEP trade industry and collectively help move the industry together for those standards and get everybody operating on the same common language for Nathan? And here's the standards that we're going to move forward as an industry to help.
Well, I think that the word you're looking for is coopetition. Something that we've talked about before. Nathan and I've done presentations on it. And I think it is kind of the realization, especially from, I don't want to say contractors just our size, but it has generally been acknowledged that even if myself and my competitor won all the work we bid on, we'd never be able to execute it. Right. So why don't we work together to build out standards so that work gets done right and we have more opportunities moving forward in the future? Because I think that it does just make the entire industry better, which makes it better for us, right? The rising tide and all the other Nathanisms that we can throw out there. But I think I'm starting to see that happening more and more, and I think that's just a mindset. Again, another mindset, another change management. There's just unless something changes in the future, which from what I've seen, it's not, there's going to be plenty of work.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't.
Well, yeah, the stat this morning of it takes 13,000 buildings a day between now and 2050 to keep up with the demand.
Right. And you've got the shrinking workforce and everything else that goes into that. So if we don't band together, we're all going to flounder.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, shout out to Sean McGuire and his efforts through MCAA to get SMACNA and NECA groups together and to, create the sort of synergies and have these higher level conversations of what does coopetition look like, between MEP trade contractors. But at the project level, the formal term for coopetition is IPD, integrated project delivery, and kind of this, why have we strayed away from this, utopian view of, well, hey, we do actually all have a shared risk and shared reward in the success of this project. So let's figure out more innovative ways to build it based on these new measurement requirements. But yet we just seem more comfortable doing it the way we've always done it, even though we complain about it being broken and being the reason we're in this mess. So it is the definition of a dilemma that we're in, that really our own mindset is how we'll get ourselves out of it.
Yeah. So are the MEP trade guides, are you glutton for punishment?
I think we might be. I think that's a common joke for any construction business owner, is like, why do I do this, for these razor thin margins? But I would agree. We're just stubborn, I guess.
Proud.
There you go. So what have you seen be effective in helping change that mindset?
It's conferences. It's getting out and mingling with your peers. It is fostering that open mindset. In one of the opportunities we had with Nathan's group, kind of one of the first meetings we had when we were in Phoenix, we started to get to talk to owners, and I think that you're going to start seeing a shift to more of, what do they call themselves, serial owners, people that are going to, build and occupy more of the buildings, and they're going to want a different relationship. And I think that that's going to kind of force some of us that maybe are too stubborn or too proud to shift from our ways to adjust, because the market's dictating that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to your point, Travis, on just the conferences and getting outside of your own bubble, like a lot of folks may have these thoughts in their head and think that they're crazy thoughts, and then you go somewhere and you realize, oh, I'm not the only person thinking this, and that other people have done it before, and here's how they had that conversation, and here's how it went, and how it played out, and you can start to kind of visualize how you would be that change maker inside your organization. So for those that are in the audience that, this is your first time with a lot of these change makers, ask those questions, get into the nitty gritty over happy hour of, how did that conversation go? What was their response? What did you say back? How long did this stuff take, so that you can, better manage your own expectations and higher likelihood of success?
What's the next step in the industrialization of the trades? What does that really look like?
I would say for what I'm seeing and thinking about is to, we always are afraid of being commoditized, but I think one of the ways that we will be most competitive is if we start creating our own products. Mm-hmm. Truly take a manufacturing mindset. Yes, there's tons of different pumps and whatnot out there, but maybe we could specialize on creating some specific pump skids and start getting those spec'd into, and that allows us, because it's the repetitive behavior, repetitive process of manufacturing that gets us better, that gets us industrialized. Mm-hmm. It'll be a balancing act, because we don't want to just be turned into a piece number, whatever. But right. I think that there's enough expertise that comes along with that SKU that we just sold that will provide that extra value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the word is componentize, right? You don't want to commoditize, you want to componentize, yes. If that's even a word. But yeah, getting to this interchangeability is something that I think the trades can absolutely leverage and be a key differentiator, because what really differentiates you is your process, your ability to bring in different models or valves or other items, but understand how they work within the larger system. And the more that you can create your own rules within your own digital systems, you can really control your destiny and almost do, rapid on the fly takeoff estimates that will even, tell you the quality of that system and give them back more than what they asked for in the time frame, in this crazy time frame that they need it back in. But only when, companies have that really good foundation of, if I bring things in, I can very quickly produce an output estimate and then actually deliver on that estimate within, reasonable accuracy.
Mm-hmm. Kind of trying to land the plane here. This is one of my new favorite questions to end the podcast. If I could give you all power and you could snap your finger and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you innovate?
Hopefully I'm not stealing Nathan's, but I would love to innovate on that data flow. I think that it's pretty ridiculous the way that we are still, bidding and transferring information on PDFs and flat, dead pieces of paper, digital mm-hmm. paper. I would love to innovate on that, to just have it so that we can receive from design digitally, truly digitally, and we can push back out deliverables at the end of it. I think that would streamline a lot of processes, and it would remove a lot of the, a lot of that stuff is contractual and risk-based because of the way we've done contracting in the past. Everybody's trying to cover their own asses. I think if we make it a true digital transfer, I think a lot of that goes away.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't start with mine, but you ended with mine, because mine is changing contracts.
There you go.
That's the other obvious answer, right? It's either data or contracts. But no, I do think that is one of the more frustrating, especially as a trade contractor, because you're already multiple layers down the chain, and it can feel very despairing at times. But I think, the more that we can band together, and some of our ideas in Seattle, Travis, at our last workshop were around, submitting bids as a joint MEP team, regardless of the requirement to do so, because you just realize in these types of projects and these types of markets, it doesn't make sense to bid them separately, that there's so much integration between the three. So you just start to team up, and that, it may result in you doing slightly less work or really less work in the estimating phase, and hopefully like less resource work, but you still end up actually, making higher profit margins. So it gets back to, how we measure ourselves.
Right.
It's amazing to me. So I've been asking that for the last couple of months, and contracts comes up so much in that one innovation thing.
It is contracting. I mean, contracting is the problem, right?
Which is the why. It's the what's in it for me,
right.
is the contract, right? At the end of the day, you have to make money doing what you love, and the contract is a huge part of how you make money doing what you love.
Yeah.
And I think some of it's going to change, Nathan, to your point, we were talking about the amount of work. We are starting to see contractors in a position to say no. I don't need your job. If you're going to try to force these contract terms on me, fine, go find somebody else, go find some other sucker. I think that's going to, again, shift the marketplace a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do people connect and learn more about what you guys are both doing?
Oh man. So constructionprogress.org, we've got our next virtual roundtable discussion will be on December 14th. And then we'll be back in person in Denver, February 8th through the 10th for the AEC Integration Summit. And all that information is on, again, constructionprogress.org.
Yeah, and you can find me on LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach out to me. ConstructionDorks.com is my podcast with Trent Leinenbach, Jeff Sample, and Jonathan Marsh. We try to semi-regularly release every other week. Those are the best places to find.
I get excited when it comes up in my feed every time.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's here this week.
We try to keep everybody on pins and needles while we're waiting. That's probably, I'm not as active posting on LinkedIn lately for whatever reason, but that's probably the best way to find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us again at MEP Force. Nathan, sorry you couldn't be here in person this year, but you have the hat
Tell
on,
Amy
so
I say
it
hi
works.
again.
And thanks for you who are in the audience actually coming in. It's a whole new experience actually seeing people
right
while I'm recording a podcast. So
it's a little different. It is different.
Yeah. So awesome. Thanks so much. And that will conclude it and wrap it up. I think it is now, for a programming note, it's lunchtime now. I know I'm really hungry, so that's why we're wrapping probably a couple minutes early, but thanks so much for coming.